Welcome, all you citizens of the world. I'm Michael James, and I'm here with another edition of the Live from the Heartland show. This one is for the week of October 5th, and I'm going to have a couple of good friends on. I'm going to have my friend Peter Kuttner. We're going to talk about voting and how he got involved in the movement, etc. And then we're going to talk with the incomparable David Orr, who used to be the Cook County Clerk, and we're going to talk about voter suppression. Let's start off by doing a big happy birthday, a big shout out for 100 years to Jimmy Carter. And for those of you younger people who may not remember, Jimmy Carter, on his second day of office, pardoned all who resisted the war on Vietnam, all who resisted the draft. And he went on to install solar panels on the White House, a move for which he was derided by Reagan, and Reagan had them removed. Consider that in the light of climate change today and what's going on in North Carolina and other states in the Southeast. In memoriam, 3 big, powerful people died. I would like to acknowledge all of them. We've got Dikembe Mutombo, who played ball for 18 years. He was from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Turned out to be not only a great ball player, basketball we're talking, but also a humanitarian. We also want to talk about Kris Kristofferson, who was really a wonderful guy. You know, he was in the country world in many ways, but as he says, I was in Nicaragua with the Sandinistas. I've argued for Leonard Peltier, Mumia Abdul Jamal, United Farm Workers. I've been a radical for a long time. I guess it's too bad. I'd be more marketable by being a right-wing redneck, but I got into this to tell the truth. And a third death was the guy who has the most hits in baseball, Pete Rose, who unfortunately got banned from baseball because he gambled on a game. But he is someone to remember and know about in the world of sports. One of the things that I read this week that was pretty interesting was in the Washington Post, I recall, and it was about a mom who worked at a school, and she had a daughter who had been transgender, had been a boy and turned into a girl. And at some point, they went after both of them. And there's this quote that says, "Trans athletes, women are very rare." A 2021 Associated Press analysis of 20 proposed state bans found that legislators in most states couldn't point to a single trans athlete in their own region. In Florida, state records show that just 2 trans girls have played girls' sports over the last decade. A bowler who graduated in 2019, and this young woman, Elizabeth, who is featured in the story. On the labor front, just in time for the election, we have the dock workers on the East and Gulf Coasts going out on strike for the first time since 1977. They're out over wages, benefits, job security. 45,000 workers we're talking. They're concerned about the use of new technology. The West Coast dock workers are a different union, and they got a contract a few years ago with a significant increase in their wages. If you're out and about this weekend, the Catholic workers are having a national gathering from the 4th, which I think is Thursday, through the 6th, Sunday. Chicago Then and Now, a Catholic worker national gathering in Chicago. And all those events are being held at St. Gertrude Church, 1401 Granville in Rogers Park. And if you want to learn more, you can go to the website, which is francishouse.chicago.org/schedule. Okay. We're going to take a little musical break. I think we're going to hear Kris Kristofferson doing a little bit of me and Bobby McGee, and then we'll be back with Peter Kuttner. It's time for our first guest on Live from the Heartland for the week of October 5th. And this is someone who's no stranger to the show. He's been on talking about Rising Up Angry, a group that both he and I were involved with from 1969 to 75. He also has been on more recently talking about labor films. And it's always good to have a talk with my friend Peter Kuttner, who yesterday being on Monday of this week, stopped by my house. And he had just come back from Canada. And we got into talking about voting. We got into talking about how we got involved in the movement. So I thought, why not have Peter on just as having a good discussion? So good day to you, Peter Kuttner.
And good day to you, Brother Michael James.
So you were up in Canada. Why don't you just give us a little hint about what was going on up there and what triggered your thoughts about voting?
Well, my niece lives up there. She's the daughter of my brother who passed away about 10 years ago. And she's had two children since my brother passed. And I like to think of myself as I'm like, what is that, great uncle, grand uncle, but kind of the surrogate grandpa. So having great experience as a grandfather, I have I have a 30 and 24-year-old granddaughters, and expecting another in January, possibly on your birthday, Michael.
That would be the 16th.
Uh,
83.
that's about. Anyway, they mentioned, they being her husband, who's a Canadian, but votes in the United States. I don't quite know the various things of how that happens. She's not can't vote in Canada yet. But anyway, they were both decided they were voting for Jill Stein, a third party candidate. And that got me thinking about all the times I had voted for third party candidates. And in fact, when I met you or when we got to be friendly, was in 1968, which was my first presidential election. And even though I had grown up in a family of proud Democrats, not really to the left, but slightly off center to the left, in that they call themselves independents. And were often, in fact, one of the first campaigns that I remember them being involved with was in 1955, when Daley the older, Daley the greater, maybe you'd call him, ran for mayor for the first time, and they were involved with other independent Democrats that backed the alderman from the Fifth Ward, an economist from the University of Chicago. But you know what? Speaking of my brother, speaking of presidential elections, speaking of my parents, my mom's side of the family, actually my dad too. My dad grew up in Uptown, and my mom grew up in Rogers Park, and she lived in a big old apartment building on Pratt and Lakewood. Is that right? Yeah, Pratt and Lakewood. I think it's got a name for it, the Clarion or the something like that. Anyway, they met at Senn High School. And that's what eventually brings me here. But her best friend, my mom's best friend in high school, was a woman who married a slightly older guy that she met, who'd gone through University of Illinois Law School and ran for Congress are you guys the seventh in the congressional district that Jan Schakowsky has now. And his name was Sidney Yates. He became pretty famous. There's a room in the Cultural Center, the old library, named after him. And he was particularly good on the arts. He really stood up for the public arts and government money going towards the arts, which has helped a lot of us, particularly filmmakers, of which I am among. Anyway, they ran him for Congress in 1948. And I was 5 years old, so this is a memory for me. My brother was 3. My mom and dad got to go to the inauguration, which television had just come in, but we didn't have one. And so my brother and I think my aunt was taking care of us. My mother and father went to Washington, and we were listening to it on the radio. And that's Harry Truman who had been vice president under FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Roosevelt died, Truman took over, dropped a couple of bombs, and then ran for president. So this is his first election. Anyway, I had you know how the microphone is placed in a way right in front of the president giving the speech, where you can kind of hear individuals behind him clapping. You can hear you can kind of make them out. You know, it's not the president clapping. But I had my brother, my 3.5-year-old brother, convinced that every time there was a clap, that was my mom or my dad. And he got really giggly about it and drooly and stuff. Anyway, that's my first memory of electoral stuff. And I'm only 5 years old. So
let's get back to why your niece is voting for Jill Stein and what that means and what your opinion is on that.
Well, I think they're foolish, one. However, their reasons for voting for Jill Stein, I don't think are foolish. They see the Democrats as a war party. There's two wars going on. Neither of them do my niece and her husband support, and they feel that they can't, in good conscience, vote for Kamala Harris. There's no way that they would vote for Donald Trump, and they're young enough to feel that they don't want to vote for someone that they don't want to vote for. And they're willing to, if the consequences are that Trump gets elected, actually, they live in Canada, so it's no skin off them. But
I had my wife told me about she was just in New York and she met someone who was talking about if the orange-haired guy wins, they'll go back to France. And it seems to me more than ever, if that were to happen, we'd have to stick around to try to be part of the core that works to bring things back to at least a better position. And you had a story, you reminded me yesterday about someone we both knew, Stoughton Lind. He was a pretty famed academic and a radical guy. And he, what did he tell you, Peter?
Well, actually, it was in an apartment in Uptown, where not far from where my dad had grown up at some point. And you were involved with the Peace and Freedom Party.
Yeah, we were running Peggy Terry for vice president with Eldridge Cleaver.
All right. You want to first say what that was about?
Well, it was just for us, it was an attempt to move around the Midwest and even beyond and really recruit people to leave campuses and college and go to work with poor and working white people.
So who was Peggy Terry?
Peggy Terry was a welfare mother from Uptown who was part of the Joint Community Union.
And I think importantly, although I don't want to play the race card so early, she was white.
She certainly was. So she said she had been a racist, talked about picking cotton in Oklahoma. She ended up in Birmingham, I think, and she met a guy who she married, who later had a bookstore called The Guild here in Chicago. So she got real political and involved with the Congress of Racial Equality. But that was the only time I managed a vice presidential campaign for the United States.
I don't know. You kind of look a little like Tim Walz. Maybe you could be working kind of a coach, athlete guy. But no joke. I guess this was probably Eldridge Cleaver was the first Black man long before Obama who ran for president. And interestingly, to us who were really, we didn't call it that then, but our organizing work was really anti-racist, what we were doing. So I think it's of note that a white woman and a Black man were running that time. In any event, Stoughton Lind, who was maybe more radical than me at the time, still said, look, you have to vote for a Democrat. And the reason that you do is One, it gives people breathing time. It takes the less liberal party, it takes them off their backs. The Democrats are still coming out of the New Deal and have programs that help poor people, basically. And they could well go away, just like they could these days, if the Republicans are elected, and if we were to vote for Eldridge and Peggy Terry, we would be taking a vote away from a Democrat, and possibly they'd lose. As it was, they did lose. I don't think it had to do with our votes for Eldridge Cleaver. It had more to do with the terrible, immoral, racist war that they were waging. Cut to today, there is, in my opinion, and in the opinion of my two young relatives, a terrible racist war going on as well, and they can't, in good conscience, and they're concerned citizens, two young kids can't vote for Kamala Harris because of that. I just want to make it clear. I don't feel my politics have changed much, but I don't see there's no breathing room in that the dangers of having another Trump presidency override everything. And I told you yesterday, and I've said this in a number of elections, that I will hold my nose to vote for the Democrats. And I've done it so many times over the years, I think I've deviated my own septum.
Well, it's difficult to have
a joke, and you're supposed to react. Ha ha ha! You go.
There, it is a good joke. I still have that same position about you vote for the Democrats because it gives you more breathing room to bring things along. I mean, there was certainly back in '68, there was no way we were going to vote for Hubert Humphrey. And we didn't. And I'm not blaming us and the demonstrators in the streets. I blame more the Chicago police and the way they reacted for what happened and led Nixon to win that election. I think things are even more dire now than they were then. Not only do we have two wars going on, with the U.S. influence is less than it was. We have, the massive climate change that we're all experiencing these days. There are so many issues that while we want to protest from the street and push people, we also need to have people in a position who will listen to us. And that's one of the reasons I will vote for the Democrats. And I assume you will too.
Yes.
Your nose, Peter.
I will.
We have a few.
I'll vote for the Democrats.
We have a couple of minutes left, and I'd love for you to share. You're a filmmaker. You're active in your union, IATSE, which is the International Alliance of Theatrical and Stage Employees. They're like the stagehands in the movies. You and I were in the same movie set. I was playing a Nazi in The Package, one of Andy Davis's film with Gene Hackman. You were a cameraman on that. So you're an active union fellow. You also make movies, a number of them, a lot of shorts, and they're political. And you went to down south during some really important civil rights events. So I'd like you to take the next few minutes and tell people how you got involved, why you're still involved, and maybe a recommendation for younger people to get involved.
I don't know if I can do that in 2 minutes, but I can tell you that
You actually have 5.
Thank you. The first film that I made was at Northwestern, where I had started as a commuter student way back in the day. That'd be about 1960. I studied comparative literature. I didn't study film at all, but I got very interested in film and got tight with one of the people in the department. They allowed me to use the equipment. There was a symposium, I think they called it, going on that was going to talk about civil rights. And I made a little film. It's only about 8 minutes about a big white middle to upper middle class, even rich kids, university paying no attention to it. The civil rights movement, that is. Then Selma happened. I left school. Selma happened. I got a draft deferment, and I said, "Wait a minute! I'm one of the guilty parties in this movie that I made. What did I do? I hadn't done anything." So we went to Selma. Sort of, I have to criticize myself in that it was kind of an adventure to go down there. Frankly, we watched Bloody Sunday. We saw that on TV, but we didn't go down. And then we saw the next week where they tried, nothing happened. They didn't get across. We didn't go down. But when they safely got over the bridge, we said, "Oh, we should go down. We should go down." So we did, but it was, I'm being funny about it, but it was a life-changing experience. It was pretty remarkable. And it said to me, I needed to be involved in this movement of change. But at the time, I thought I could do it from within. And I got a job at Channel 11, which wasn't quite the public station that it is now. They call it educational TV. And I worked there for a couple of years. And I saw that because of the charity money that was coming in there, and it was all corporate stuff, that you could even do less at the so-called public TV than you could at commercial TV. And then kind of went back out to the fringes and ran into people who were making films about demonstrations that weren't being shown on TV. This is a group called the Newsreel. I met them in New York, and they said, we got some friends who are going to have big demonstrations in Chicago. Well, I had been political and electoral, but I'll tell you, I was so glad to leave Chicago at the time. I don't even know if I knew the convention was going to be there. And I certainly didn't know anything about the demonstrations. And they talked me into coming back here, and we ended up starting to do exactly the same things that they were doing in New York. That's kind of the rest of the story. I have stayed the whole time on the fringes in terms of my political work and my documentary film work, but ended up in the mainstream because I was a worker in the industry. I wasn't always a filmmaker. I was a mid-level camera technician. That was my stagehand work. And I needed that because I needed insurance. We both had children around the same time. I didn't have any insurance, and the union really helped for that. And the reason that I can talk to you at 11 o'clock in the morning is because now that I don't work anymore, I have a union pension, and that helps me to not have to go to work.
Long live the unions.
Yeah. If I can do one more quick thing, is that although I have not been in the workplace for 8 or 9 years, almost 10 years, I'm still very active in the union, because what is happening in the union is that a radical caucus, well, not so radical, a reform caucus has formed within the IATSE, which is 150,000 Canadian and American workers. And it's based on what the Teamsters did, what the auto workers did more recently, and the CTU, the Chicago Teachers Union, all formed radical caucuses, reform caucuses within their larger union, and eventually took over leadership. And that's what we see happening with the IATSE.
Well, Peter, it's good talking to you. I wish we had a little more room, but as you know, you're welcome back anytime, and I will be seeing you in the next few days. So you keep up the good work, and everybody else, stay tuned here on the left end of your dial, whether you're listening to this on air, by stream, online. We're everywhere these days, and we'll be back in a few minutes with David Orr, and we're going to talk about voter suppression. Welcome back, you citizens of the world. It's live from the Heartland. I'm Michael James, and everybody knows that we are in the heat of an election season. It's talked about as being the most meaningful and important election in our lifetime. And for me, that's a lot of years. There's a lot of talk about voter suppression. Our next guest is the incomparable, the one and only David Orr. the man who brought Illinois motor voter, early voting rights, LGBT marriage, tenant bill of rights, did a lot of great work for the masses here in Chicago and Cook County and beyond. And he oversaw many elections and made sure that the vote was fair and everything was carried out on the up and up. So with all this talk of voter suppression and voting rights, et cetera, I thought it'd be a good time to get our friend and neighbor David back on. And here we are. So good day to you, David.
Well, thank you, Michael. Good to be here.
There's all these horror stories about voter suppression, things going on. In Georgia, we've heard a lot about nefarious ways to try to block the vote or to make it problematic after the vote is taken. How about giving us a little overview of how you see the question of voter suppression and its impact on this upcoming election?
Okay, let me first link it with something else that, the pundits are all talking about how close the race is, and some polls have Harris up, some polls have Trump either up or in a tie. One of the things that they do agree on is that Harris has a very solid ground game. On the other night on the news, there were some experts who've been following the Trump campaign that said basically he didn't have the ground game. He basically has the voter suppression game. So in other words, one is trying to get out as many votes as possible. The other is trying to deprive certain people of their votes. But let's look at this, because the certain people in this case try not to be partisan, but it's Trump is the team that seems to be pushing the voter suppression. Okay, and they've gotten much more sophisticated than 4 years ago. Sophisticated means they've got to those nuances in election law where it's not always real clear cut. And that's what they're taking advantage of. For example, in Florida, not Florida, but in Georgia and many other places, they're trying to do a number of things, but Georgia's unique in trying to do a hand count. Now, this goes back to people being pretty angry about machines, not trusting machines, although we trust the machines to buy our products every day and do the calculations of how much we owe. We had this back when I was clerk. We had a number of people that were really concerned about the direction of elections. And we actually let them do a hand count at one point. They did a hand count. It wasn't official, but they had, and again, no offense, they're good people, but they had a really hard time agreeing. Someone would get 112 to 75, then they'd get 115 to 78, but basically they couldn't really get it very well, whereas the automatic or the technical responses were always right on. That doesn't mean we should blindly trust our new technology machines, but it shows how difficult that is. So when they get to these nuances I'm talking about, is that you could really slow up an election. If I understand Georgia right, they're only going to be doing a total count. Now, a hand count is fine if you're in a place like Bangladesh. I once traveled to Bangladesh to be an election observer. Bangladesh only had one ballot. It's either Michael James or David Orr. One of us was going to be president, okay? And they sat down in a particular precinct, and afterwards they threw all the ballots on the floor, which weren't a lot, and then you count mine and I count yours, and when we come to agreement, we both have the right amount, we've got it. But when I say we need to understand there's a lot behind the elections that the deniers and the suppressionists don't tell us. For example, we have many ballot styles. We have 112 ballot styles in the Chicago ballot or the Cook County ballot. That means it's not just Michael versus David for president. It's all these other races, including local races and school board races now, and judges, dozens and dozens of judges. And so that's where it gets tricky if you really want a hand count of all those. So that's just one example of many things. When I say they're getting more sophisticated, let's talk about challenges, okay? People have a right to challenge a candidate. I know Michael James, and he's not Michael James. People have the right to do that in a polling place. They can be election watchers. But here's where the subtleties come in which they're trying to get rid of subtleties and basically put their people in who would do this. If in Chicago or Cook, if somebody challenges, they challenge you and the next person, the next person, the next person, all say, I know, well, wait a second, where's your evidence? And so sooner or later, that person's going to say, we're not going to listen to you anymore because you don't have valid challenges. A lot of the challenges going on, particularly in big Democratic counties around that, they're challenging hundreds and thousands of voters, okay, saying they're not really who they say they are, in many cases without proof. So these things are where it gets very tricky, and that's where you really need to have good judges. You need to have nonpartisan judges. I mean, at least Democrats, Republicans, that hopefully balance out. But there's a lot more going on. But that's the key to it. That if there's vague areas, like in Georgia, this could really disrupt the election, and they could say, "Hey, we don't have time now." Or we want to challenge this or that. So there's a lot of reasons that they're doing this. Most of it is to cause confusion, chaos, or deny certain people from voting.
David, what are different ways that the vote can be suppressed? Ones that you know about, even hypothetical.
Well, I just mentioned a couple that I think are going to be big this fall. One is the challenges. There's already thousands of challenges already done by certain election workers. Okay. If you have lots and lots of those, and you've got chaos because you're doing a hand count and you don't have a lot of time, you can see where people say, well, now I've got an election board, which is no longer fair. Remember they created a new election board with different people. So even the Secretary of State in Georgia, Republican, and the Attorney General in Georgia, Republican, both say this is nuts. Furthermore, you don't do these kind of changes at the last minute. Elections are supposed to be thought out well in advance. So you've got the people challenging people. You've got this now Georgia with its hand count. You've got other places where there's all sorts of different little tricks. They tried to do something recently in Nebraska, and that failed. There's almost no state where they're not trying to do certain kinds of voter suppression. Iowa, and as we realize how close this election is, any amount of voter suppression, like I say, for example, back in Georgia again, they want to do special investigations into certain counties. Well, it turns out the county they're most interested in is Fulton County, Georgia, which happens to be where Atlanta is. Okay, so it's a never-ending battle. We've defeated a lot of these things legally if there's time to legally do it. But like I say, they're getting more sophisticated. So I would say that's a big worry for me come to November.
I think, like in the Georgia case, I'm not sure what the ability is to challenge this decision that they have for a hand count. As you pointed out, the governor and the attorney general, both Republicans, have opposed it. But there's this new board, and they went ahead with it. And to my understanding, I'm not sure if it goes to the Georgia Supreme Court or all the way on up to the U.S. Supreme Court, but that doesn't afford us a lot of fairness in a lot of ways these days. Any take on that?
No, I don't know which way it's going to go. I do know there's people that believe there's a good chance because of both the elected officials I mentioned and the legal precedent that some of these changes will be defeated in Georgia, for example. The one in Nebraska was recently defeated. I can tell you exactly what's going on in Iowa. It's that they're looking for every opportunity. So there will be lots of legal challenges between now and Election Day. Some will be going on right during the election and some right afterwards. Remember, Trump tried to discourage dramatically voting by mail, okay? And one of the things he used to say is that everybody should have to have their ballot in by Election Day or it shouldn't count. Now, again, sounds reasonable unless you know the history, okay? For example, as county clerk, I knew that lots of people mailed their ballot. If Election Day was, let's say, the 5th or something, they mailed their ballots often by 6 or 7 days ahead of time, but they didn't arrive till days afterwards, okay? Those voters should not be deprived the right to vote if they mailed it before election day. Okay, that's the key. And in most states, like in Illinois, you have 2 weeks to finalize your vote because there are mistakes made, there's confusion on certain things, and you have to certify, you've got to confirm that all your ballots are accurate. So let me just give you another example in the real world with things that happen. It's election day, and let's say your machine breaks down, or so the battery goes out for a while, or the electricity in the building goes out for 20 minutes. Okay, now people don't stop voting. What they'll do is they'll keep voting, and let's say in that 20-minute period, they get 20 votes or 40 votes. The judges are instructed to put those ballots, okay, in a separate compartment, which is prepared for, and at the end of the day, feed those into the machine, okay? But you can see how some person who wasn't very sophisticated election-wise, we say, look at what they're doing. They're shoving stuff in the machine at the end of the day, and all they're really doing is taking those 20 or 40 voters that were deprived of the right because the electricity went out. So that's why most jurisdictions have about 2 weeks, okay? And in Illinois, we gave people up to 2 weeks. I saw FedExes that were mailed a week before the election that didn't arrive by election day. FedExes. Okay, so most of these things they're very rational. Democrats and Republicans generally agree with it across the country. But now with these new fanatics, mostly coming from the Trump campaign, all bets are off.
David, let me raise another possibility, is that question of intimidation. I was reading in the paper this morning about Portage County, Ohio, where the Elections Board has barred the sheriff's office from providing security during early voting after the sheriff, a guy named Bruce Zuchowski, who was the sheriff, he's a Republican, urged people to collect the addresses of residents displaying yard signs for Vice President Kamala Harris. Right. And we hear about that. We hear about, gunshots. We hear, just a lot of intimidation. Can you address that a little bit?
Well, again, that's more common with, particularly if you're from a big city like Chicago with the old machine. Okay, the machine is not what it once was, but the machine always had intimidating. You happen to know my wife from a long time ago was beaten up by an election judge because they were challenging something down on Kenmore Winthrop right here in Chicago. There's lots of ways to intimidate. So by looking where people are coming from, meaning where they might have a Harris poster in their front yard, those are the people that you might want to go after election day. And you could threaten them by saying, we're going to challenge you. We know you don't really live here. Racism plays a big part in it. Okay, sometimes people are going door to door and say, we know this is really not you. And so if you go to the polls, you'll be in trouble. There's all sorts of intimidation. I feel in some ways like having that experience of having to fight the old machine in Chicago and Cook County, it gave me a great understanding of some of the Trump people, not all Republicans, but some of those Trump people, because basically they're Verdoliaks on the right. I hate to put it like that, but they're kind of like our machine folks, but they were right-wing, not centrist or whatever you might call Verdoliak or Burke.
Speaking of elections here in Cook County, our producer, sometimes host, your good friend Katie Hogan, she always said that with you overlooking Cook County elections, she felt a lot of confidence. She's afraid that cheating may make a comeback. So what should a regular citizen be on the lookout for in maintaining fraud-free elections?
I think try and find their best source of information about elections. For example, one group, League of Women Voters, a nonpartisan group, they've got the city chapter, they've got chapters in a lot of suburbs and so forth. It's just an example. League of Women Voters always provided lots of election judges. You could also be an election judge yourself. And again, election judges are not meant to be, pro one candidate or another. It's okay if they got their opinions. They just can't function that way on election day. Or you could be a watcher. You can be an official watcher and you might alert. Like, let's say you're a watcher on November 5th here or in Georgia, and you see something going on where the same person comes up with no evidence and is challenging black voter after black voter. Okay. And a lot of times they're in a hurry, they got family or whatever. So okay, forget it. I'm not going to vote. That person could immediately get on the phone to people, okay, who are already identified before the election about who can help or who can immediately come to a polling place, either an official of the election board or another person. So it's hard to predict. It's just that the more you know about these things, the things that you brought up, in Ohio recently and in some of the states we're talking about, the more we know. And by the way, I think, in fact, you told me, I think that sheriff has been replaced.
Yeah, they did. They voted that he can't oversee.
So the key is trying to get the information. Elections are a little complicated to understand some of the things that I'm talking about today and why they are the way they are. But read up on a little bit or call a group like the League of Women Voters or whatever might be a good group in your particular neighborhood. Volunteer to act, talk to your friends, find out if they've had any problems with registering. One of the things that the anti-suppression people are doing is they're checking with people who've had any problems with registrations. That's usually a big area, danger area, and making sure that everything's, T's are crossed and I's are dotted. So those things all help. So surprisingly, they help more when you can provide confidence to those people who are nervous. They haven't voted before. There might be a young person, or they might be African American and feel like something's not quite right.
David, I'm going to switch here to a little bit to the Electoral College, and Nate Cohen is someone we looked to in the last presidential election, and he had a lot of people observing what he was thinking and talking about. He's not been quite as in favor these days, but he did write just recently that Donald Trump's advantage in the Electoral College might be shrinking, and we do know that the Electoral College, that it has the rural vote has a lot more weight than those of us in the city. The 10 most populous states are home to half the U.S. population, but their 20 senators make for only 1/5 of the U.S. Senate.
Right.
What do you think it will really take to reform, transform, eliminate the Electoral College?
Well, it would take one thing we don't have right now. We do have some Republicans that govern from character. That's what I mean. And I don't mean to besmudge the others. I'm just saying ones that we see are willing to be independent minded and maybe put the issue above politics. You need to have a strong Democratic majority, and you need to have a very serious campaign so people understood just what you said. It is nuts that, let's say you're a Republican, let's say you're Trump right now, and you've got 52 votes in the Senate, okay? And yet you can never pass anything, okay? You're the elected president, you've got a majority in the Senate, you can never pass anything because of the filibuster, which is similar to the Electoral College in a sense. So 10 or even eight Democrats could block everything the Republicans are trying to do. And that's wrong. That's been happening much more so recently.
But usually it's not the Republicans, right?
Well, usually, but I'm trying to be a little bit
Okay.
In other words, so we all understand we don't want anybody doing it, whatever party you're at. I didn't like it when the Democrats did it under Verdoliak and Burke. I don't like it when the Republicans do it. But the Electoral College, we should always remind ourselves, it was a government based on a slave constitution many, many years ago. And we've changed a lot of things in the country and technology, and the Supreme Court has dealt with thousands of issues that have nothing to do with 1786 and 7, okay? But we need to deal with Electoral College because it's totally unfair. The person who gets the most votes should win, and it shouldn't be this. Now, the only good news, at least for the Democrats at the moment, is by having serious contests in Arizona and Nevada, and now North Carolina, even Iowa, even people talking about Florida and Texas. By having closer races in those states, it's an advantage for the Democrats because now the Republicans have to put money and resources into some states they didn't think they had to. A few years ago, Virginia was a swing state. Now it seems fairly blue. So things change over time. We know the other issues in the election. I think probably the most critical of all happens to be women's rights, particularly reproductive rights. Probably the single most dynamic issue in this election.
David, let me try to get you to talk about how you see the election going, and if you were a magician or a wizard or someone who could predict with accuracy, what's your take on where things are at and how they might turn out?
Well, I do worry. I worry because of some of Trump's character problems and so forth. I worried about anything that he might do in the last few weeks of the campaign. But I'd say that the good news for Trump is, despite all of his problems and indictments, et cetera, and convictions, that the bottom line is he's still right in there competitive. Okay. The good news for the Harris campaign is that they've got a ground game. And they're spending more money. I mean, they're raising good money too. So is Trump, but using money for social media, which is very important nowadays. As I said before, the advantage goes to Trump when it comes to voter suppression. There's polls everywhere, but I will tell you about something that I saw recently. Basically, it was 4 key pollsters, well-known, Nate Silver, The Economist, The Hill, and 538. And all of them were saying, what are the chances? What's your best information, the chances that Harris wins versus Trump? Okay. Nate Silver had it 53-43. Okay. 53.2 for Harris, 43. In other words, that's it's kind of like a sweepstakes. Okay. The Economist had 57% for Harris. The Hill had 55-45. And again, 538, the polling outfit, had 58-42. Now, again, we all know that Trump outperformed the pollsters in 20. There's people that support him that don't want to tell people. And there's people that are probably opposing him that don't want to tell people because they're Republicans. They've gotten sickened by him, but they don't want their neighbors to know that. So it's a big question mark. So the key is who delivers the best. And again, not all Republicans are voter suppressionists. Fortunately, some of those are helping us defeat suppression. But I think it's suppression versus the ground game.
Yeah, well, hopefully we got a good ground game. We know that Katie Hogan and a lot of other people from our neighborhood, our ward, and beyond are going to Wisconsin and to Michigan, knocking on doors. And I'd like to ask you that now that you're no longer the biggest vote getter in the county and the Cook County clerk, you're a little bit retired, but like all of us who are retired with a political bent, we're still doing a lot of things. And I'm wondering what you do these days to keep yourself occupied and happy.
Well, if anything, I feel like I've been too busy. And as we get up there in age, Michael, I'm trying to shed a few things, particularly the tasks are not my favorites. So as you may know, that I phased out Good Government Illinois, which was a group that I started when I left the clerk's office. And I joined our forces with Reform for Illinois, which is a nonprofit group run by a lot of good people that you know. And they're very good. So I don't have to do as much of the administrative work. I don't have to do the fundraising. I will help them, but I'm not in charge, and that's nice. So I can focus on podcasts. You know, we did a good podcast 2 weeks ago with the Inspector General, which is Inspector General is real dynamo, Deborah. And because there are some things happening on the ethics front, and so I'm glad to see that, working with Matt Martin. So basically, podcasts, do radio shows, try and keep up with the issues as much as possible for an old guy. And then I still have some administrative things, but other than that, just keeping up with the family and the doctor appointments.
David, we'll have you back on whenever you want to come on or whenever we need a good guest. And when we got some real serious questions about voting and justice in America. Thank you so much, David Orr.
Thank you, Michael.
We'll see you. And everybody else, we want to thank you for tuning in to Live from the Heartland. And I'd like to thank all the people making the show possible. Hal James, the engineer, Katie Hogan, Tom Clark, and Lynn Orman, our producers. Keep doing good in the world. The world needs all the good that you do, that I do, that David Orr does, that we all do together. All power to the people.